The night Sarah's father-in-law died, her husband's family held a private dinner at the big house on Mercer Street. They planned the obituary, they divided up the sentimental items, they made decisions about the estate, about the funeral, about what flowers would go on the casket, and not one of them called Sarah, not one of them texted her. She found out the dinner happened because her neighbor mentioned it 2 days later, casually, the way people mention weather. What Sarah did not know at that moment, standing in her own kitchen holding a casserole she had baked for a grieving family that did not want her there, was that she had been removed from the family WhatsApp group 3 hours before that dinner started. She would find the notification buried under a pile of other alerts the following morning. Removed by admin, that was all it said. No explanation, no call, no apology, just a quiet digital door slamming in her face after 11 years of marriage. What they also did not know, those people who looked past her at every holiday table, who called her Marcus's wife instead of Sarah, who joked that she didn't quite fit in, who once told her she made the gravy wrong at Thanksgiving like it was a character flaw, what none of them knew was that Sarah's name was on every document that mattered. The house, the investment accounts, the life insurance policy her husband had allowed to lapse without telling her, which meant she had quietly replaced it with one of her own. They thought she was background noise in their family story. She had been for years the only load-bearing wall. This is the story of how Sarah stopped holding up the ceiling, and what happened when it came down. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something honestly. If you had given 11 years of your life to family, kept your mouth shut through 100 humiliations, kept the finances straight while they called you invisible, and then discovered you had been quietly removed from the group chat the night they needed each other most, what would you have done? Would you have shown up anyway and tried to prove you belonged? Would you have confronted your husband that same night? Or would you have done what Sarah did, gone completely quiet, opened a notebook, and started writing down everything she had ever done for them, every dollar, every decision, every sacrifice that had never been acknowledged? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because what she did next with that notebook is the part that will either make you cheer or make you completely rethink what loyalty is worth. Sarah met Marcus Hale at a work conference in the fall, 11 years before any of this happened. She was 31, he was 34. He had a warm laugh and a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was nervous, and when he introduced her to his family for the first time 6 months later, she thought she had walked into exactly the kind of life she had always wanted. Big table, loud voices, inside jokes she didn't understand yet but assumed she would eventually learn. She did not learn them, not really, not ever. The Hale family had a center of gravity, and that center was Marcus's mother, Diane. Diane Hale was a small woman with a large presence, the kind of person who asked questions that were not actually questions and gave compliments that were not actually compliments. She told Sarah at that first dinner that her dress was very brave. She told Sarah at the second dinner that it was so nice Marcus had found someone who wasn't high maintenance. She told Sarah at the third dinner, the Christmas one, that she hoped Sarah was planning to learn how to make the real gravy, because the Hale family had a specific recipe and it was very important to them. Sarah smiled and nodded and made the gravy. She asked Diane to show her the recipe. She made it perfectly. Diane looked at the gravy boat, stirred it once with a spoon, and said it was close. Marcus thought his mother was just particular. He thought the comments were just Diane being Diane. He said things like, "You have to understand her, she just needs time to warm up, and she's like that with everyone, and she really does like you, she just doesn't always show it." Sarah believed him. She wanted to believe him. She wanted this to work. She was 31 and she was in love, and she thought love made difficult things manageable. She was not wrong about love. She was wrong about what they meant by family. They married in a small ceremony 2 years after they met. The wedding was not small because Sarah wanted it that way. It was small because Marcus's family had specific ideas about cost and guest lists and tradition, and the budget had become a battleground by the third planning meeting, and Sarah had finally said quietly that she just wanted a nice day and they could have whatever was easiest. What was easiest was a ceremony with 40 guests, a reception at the Hale family home, and a meal that Diane had largely organized herself, which meant it bore very little resemblance to anything Sarah had chosen. Sarah's mother, a quiet woman named Helen who drove 3 hours to attend, pulled Sarah aside before the ceremony and said, gently, "You look beautiful. You look a little bit like you're going somewhere you're not sure about. Are you sure about this?" Sarah said yes. She kissed her mother's cheek. She walked down the aisle in a dress that Diane had implied was a little too modern and Marcus had said was perfect. And it was fine. For a while it was fine. The early years of the marriage had a rhythm. Marcus worked in commercial property management. Sarah worked in financial analysis, a job she had been doing since she was 26, a job she was quiet and precise and very good at. Together they made a comfortable income. Marcus's income was the one the family knew about and mentioned at dinner. Sarah's income was the one that actually kept them moving forward. She did not point this out. She did not think it needed to be pointed out. She assumed that in a marriage, what was hers was theirs and what was theirs, and the accounting would all come out even over time. She was not yet the kind of person who kept records. That changed slowly, not all at once. Small moments have a way of stacking without you noticing until the pile is taller than you are. The first moment she remembered later, when she was sitting with that notebook and writing everything down, was the Thanksgiving 4 years into the marriage. Marcus's brother Owen had come with his new girlfriend, a woman named Kara who was loud and cheerful and immediately called Deanne Mom by the end of the first hour. Deanne had beamed. She had refilled Kara's wine glass twice without being asked. She had put her arm around Kara's shoulder for a photo. She had shown Kara the house like she owned it, which she did not, she was a guest, but she spoke about every room with that possessive warmth that meant she considered it hers regardless. Sarah had been washing dishes in the kitchen when Diane came in and said, without any particular cruelty, just as a statement of fact, Kara is so easy to be around, some people just fit right in. Then she picked up a dish towel and walked back out. Sarah stood over the sink for a moment, then she finished the dishes. She told Marcus about it that night. He was tired. He said his mother didn't mean anything by it. He said Sarah was probably reading into it. He said the holidays were hard for everyone and could they please just try to enjoy it. Sarah lay awake in the dark for a long time thinking about the word easy, about what it meant to make yourself easy, about what it cost. The second moment was the family reunion 2 summers later. Marcus's extended family gathered every 2 years at a rented lake house. It was the kind of gathering where everyone had a role, an established position, a story that had been told so many times it had become gospel. Sarah was quiet in large groups. She listened more than she spoke. She helped with the cooking and the setup and the cleanup because that was where she knew how to make herself useful. She was not dramatic. She did not cause scenes. At the reunion, there was a family photograph, a formal one taken by a photographer Owen had hired. Someone organized everyone into rows by birth order and family unit. Sarah stood next to Marcus and smiled. She thought nothing of it. A week later, the framed photograph arrived at Diane's house. Diane had ordered copies for everyone. Sarah and Marcus received one in the mail. Sarah opened it, looked at it, and noticed that the caption on the back read, "Hail Family Reunion," and listed names. Owen was listed, Kara was listed, Marcus's aunt and her 3 children were listed, Diane was listed, Marcus's father Robert was listed. Sarah was not listed. The photo listed 11 names. She counted them twice. She was standing there holding the photo when Marcus came into the room. She showed him. He frowned at the back of the frame, turned it over a few times and said, "That's weird, probably just an oversight. I'll mention it to Mom." He did not mention it to his mother, or if he did, no one corrected the caption. Sarah put the photograph in a drawer and did not display it. She told herself it was an oversight. She told herself it was careless, not cruel. She told herself that the Hale family had 40 years of established dynamics and she was still a newcomer in some fundamental way that would soften over time. She told herself a lot of things that year. She was good at telling herself things. She had been doing it since the gravy. The third moment, and the one that she would later mark as the moment the ground actually shifted under her, happened in the 8th year of her marriage. Marcus's father, Robert Hale, had been diagnosed with a heart condition, not immediately fatal but serious enough that the fa. Miley had begun having what they called practical conversations. These were conversations about money, about the house on Mercer Street, about what would happen when Robert could no longer manage things himself. Sarah was a financial analyst. She understood estate planning better than anyone in that family. She had quietly organized her and Marcus's finances for years. She had suggested more than once that Marcus speak to his father about getting documents in order. She offered to help. She said she was happy to sit down with all of them and go through it properly. Diane thanked her and said they had it handled. The first practical conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon at the Mercer Street house. Sarah and Marcus drove there together. When they arrived, Diane met them at the door, hugged Marcus, and then said pleasantly, as though she were saying something perfectly reasonable, "Marcus, your father wanted it to be just the family for this one. You understand, Sarah, this is just the Hales for today." She smiled. She stepped aside so Marcus could walk in. She held the door in a way that did not invite Sarah through it. Sarah stood on the front porch of the house on Mercer Street. She looked at her husband. Marcus looked back at her with an expression she recognized, the one that meant he knew this was wrong and was not going to say so. He said, "I'll explain later. Is that okay?" It was not okay. She said it was fine. She drove home alone. She sat in the kitchen they had bought together and she thought about the word family, just the family. She had been married to Marcus for 8 years. She had been to every holiday, every birthday, every dinner that mattered. She had made the gravy the right way. She had swallowed the comments. She had sent birthday cards to relatives she had never actually spoken to. She had been present and patient and useful and quiet. And she was not family, not when it mattered. She did not cry that afternoon. She was past the crying stage with the Hale family. Instead, she opened her laptop and she started a document. She titled it simply Record. She typed the date, she wrote down what had happened, then she scrolled up to the top of the document and started writing backward through time. The gravy, the reunion photo, the Thanksgiving comment. Every moment she had catalogued without meaning to catalog. Every moment her body had filed away, even while her mind was excusing it. It took her 3 hours. The document was 17 pages when she was done. She read it through once, then she saved it to an encrypted cloud folder, closed her laptop, and started making dinner. That document would become important later, much later, but its existence, its mere existence, meant something had changed in Sarah. She was no longer keeping the record in her body, she was keeping it somewhere that could be retrieved. Marcus came home from the Mercer Street house that evening with a careful expression and a rehearsed explanation. The practical conversation had been about restructuring the family trust, about which assets went where, about the house. He said his parents had made some decisions and that he and Owen each had a share, and that it was just the way his father wanted it done. He said it as though it were a weather report. As though he were reading something that had been handed to him, and he was simply the delivery method. Sarah asked one question. She asked whether her name had come up in any part of those discussions. Marcus said no, he said it wasn't that kind of meeting. She nodded, she served dinner, she did not say anything else about it. What she did the following morning before Marcus was awake was make an appointment with a financial attorney, not a divorce attorney, a financial attorney, someone who could help her understand what she needed to understand about her own protections, about what her name was and was not on, about what was hers versus theirs versus his. What she found in that appointment changed the architecture of everything. The attorney, a precise woman named Clara, went through the documents Sarah brought with her, the mortgage, the joint accounts, the investment portfolio, the property deeds. Clara was quiet for a few minutes at the end, and then she said, carefully, "You have significantly more legal and financial exposure here than you may realize. Some of this is in your favor, some of this needs to be corrected before it becomes a problem." Then she paused and said, "Also, your husband's life insurance policy lapsed 8 months ago. Did you know that?" Sarah did not know that. She found out that afternoon when she gently asked Marcus about it, that he had let the policy lapse because he'd been meaning to switch providers and kept putting it off. He said it was fine. He said he would sort it out. He said she didn't need to worry about it. She did not fight him on it. She went back to Clara the following week and opened a separate life insurance NCE policy in her own name, naming herself as primary beneficiary. Then she began a quiet and systematic process of understanding exactly what she owned, what she controlled, and what was vulnerable. Not because she planned to leave, because she had finally understood that planning is not disloyalty. Planning is survival. Over the next 2 years, she made small adjustments. She moved a portion of her personal savings into an account that was hers alone. She refined the estate documents Clara had helped her draft. She made sure the house, which was jointly owned, reflected their actual 50-50 contribution rather than the vague impression Marcus's family had that he had purchased it himself. She made sure she understood every financial thread in her life. She did not hide any of this from Marcus. She simply stopped asking for his approval before doing things that were hers to do. Marcus did not notice. He was busy at work. He was managing a large commercial property portfolio that had expanded significantly. He was, by his own account, under a lot of stress. Sarah understood stress. She also understood that stress is not a reason to stop seeing the person next to you. The holidays became a calendar of small erosions. Christmas at the Mercer Street house, where Diane placed the seating in a way that consistently put Sarah at the far end of the table near the children, while Cara, who had married Owen 2 years earlier, sat in the seat nearest Diane. Easter, where the family egg hunt was photographed and posted on the Hale family social media page with a caption that named every person in the photo except Sarah, who was standing at the edge of the frame with a basket. Owen's birthday dinner, where the toast given by Robert included every person at the table by name except Sarah, who was thanked collectively under the phrase, "and everyone else who helped make this happen." She counted. She was always counting now, not bitterly, just accurately. The document on her laptop grew. She did not add to it every week, only when something happened that felt important enough to record. By the time Robert Hale's health declined seriously, in the 10th year of her marriage, the document was 41 pages. Robert had a second heart event in the spring, more serious than the first. He spent 11 days in the hospital and came home with a list of restrictions and a new level of dependency on Diane, who threw herself into caretaking with a focus that Sarah had to admit was genuine and devoted. Whatever Diane's flaws, she loved her husband. Sarah had never questioned that. She brought Robert his medication on a schedule, she drove him to appointments, she reorganized the house to make movement easier. She was, in those months, a devoted wife. Sarah brought meals to the Mercer Street house twice a week. She drove to the wholesale store and stocked them with supplies. She researched Robert's specific condition and gave Diane a printed guide about dietary management that a cardiologist friend had helped her assemble. She did all of this without being asked and without mentioning it to anyone. She did it because it was the right thing to do and because, regardless of everything, these were her husband's parents and they were suffering, and she was not the kind of person who withdrew care because she had been hurt. Diane received these meals and supplies with a kind of vague gratitude, the way you might thank a delivery driver. She never called Sarah by name when accepting them. She said things like, "Thank you, dear, and that's very helpful," and once, memorably, "You didn't have to do that." The implication of that last phrase, the way it floated in the air between them, was not that the gesture was unnecessary but that the gesture was unexpected, as though Diane had not anticipated that Sarah would be someone who did things like this. Sarah drove home after each visit and wrote nothing in the document. She knew what she knew. She did not need to record kindness. She just needed to keep giving it because it was who she was, not because she expected anything in return. Robert Hale died on a Tuesday in November. He went in his sleep, which was, the hospice nurse told Diane, the most peaceful way. Diane called Marcus at 7 in the morning. Marcus woke Sarah to tell her. They drove to the Mercer Street house together and Sarah held Diane's hand for 40 minutes while Marcus and Owen moved around the house making calls and arrangements. She held Diane's hand. Diane cried. Sarah said nothing, just held on because sometimes presence is the only language that matters. The funeral was 4 days later. Sarah wore black and stood beside Marcus and shook hands with relatives she had been meeting for 11 years. She organized the food for the reception herself, coordinating with a catering company, managing dietary restrictions, handling the logistics the way she always handled logistics, quietly and precisely. At the reception, Diane received condolences while sitting in a high-backed chair in the center of the living room. People came to her in a steady stream. Cara sat nearby, holding Diane's hand when Diane needed it. Sarah moved between the kitchen and the dining room, making sure everything was replenished. At one point she heard Diane say to a relative she didn't recognize, "Marcus is such a rock, I don't know what I would have done without Owen and Marcus." The relative said something warm and nodded. Diane continued, "And Cara has been an angel, an absolute angel." The relative agreed. Neither of them acknowledged that Sarah was standing 4 feet away carrying a tray of food. Sarah carried the tray to the dining room. She set it down. She stood for a moment with her hands flat on the table, then she went back and got the next tray. She did not put this in the document. The document was for proof, not for pain. She already had enough of both. 3 days after the funeral, she discovered the group chat. She had known there was a family WhatsApp group. She had been in it once briefly, years ago, but had been told by Marcus that it was mostly just the immediate family and was kind of chaotic, and she probably didn't need to be in it. She had accepted this. She had her own friends, her own communication channels, her own life that existed parallel to the Hale family orbit. What she did not know was that the group chat she had been removed from was not the original one. The original one had been archived. The current one, which she discovered existed because Owen's phone was on the kitchen counter at the Mercer Street house during a visit and she happened to see a notification before she could look away, was called Hale Family Just Us. The timestamp on the message she saw was the night of the private dinner, the night she had been baking a casserole in her own kitchen. The message was from Diane. It said, "So good to have everyone who matters here tonight." She looked at the counter, she looked at Owen's phone, she looked at Owen, who had not seen her see it, who was talking to Marcus in the next room. She walked to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 90 seconds. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was 42 years old. She had been part of this family for 11 years. She had made the gravy right. She had held the hand. She had carried the trays. She had baked the casseroles that no one had eaten. She walked back into the kitchen and finished washing the dishes. That evening she checked her own phone and found, buried in a stack of notifications, the one she had missed earlier in the week. Removed from Hale Family, Just Us. The timestamp was exactly 3 hours before the private dinner. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and looked at that notification for a long time. Then she took a screenshot. She put it in a new folder on her phone, which she labeled with a date and nothing else. Then she opened her laptop and added a new entry to the 41-page document. She was not angry yet, or rather she was angry, but the anger was very quiet, very cold, very clear. The kind of anger that does not shout, the kind that organizes. She had been removed from the family chat the night her father-in-law was being mourned. The night decisions were being made. The night people who mattered were allowed in the room. She had been carrying food through that house for 4 days. She had held Diane's hand for 40 minutes. She thought about what the word family actually meant to the Hale family. She thought about how they used it as a gatekeeper word, how it was always just the family when they wanted to exclude her, and always family means showing up when they wanted something from her. She thought about the seating charts and the photo captions and the reunion caption and the dinner she hadn't been invited to. She thought about all the things she had done quietly, efficiently, lovingly, with no announcement and no expectation of applause. She thought about the 41 pages. Then she thought about something else. She thought about the thing she had never told Marcus because she had never found the right time, and then had never found the need, and then had quietly decided was information she was not required to share just because she was married. She thought about what she owned, what was in her name. What had always been in her name even before the marriage, because she had worked hard and saved carefully and understood compound interest at an age when most people were still learning how to balance a checkbook. The Hale family knew Marcus's income. They had some idea of his property management career and what it paid. They had absolutely no idea about Sarah. They had never asked. They had never been curious. They had categorized her early as Marcus's wife, the quiet one, and had never revisited that categorization even as the quiet one had been, for 11 years, the financial engine of her own house. LD. She had a conversation with Clara, her financial attorney, that Friday. She laid out everything plainly. She said she was not planning a divorce at that moment. She said she was planning for all possibilities. She asked Clara to help her understand exactly what was hers, what was protected, what was not, and what would happen in any number of scenarios. Clara listened carefully and then said, "I've been hoping you would have this conversation with me." She pulled out a file that was already surprisingly thick, and they began. The following 2 weeks were quiet on the surface. Sarah went to work, she came home, she made dinner, she asked Marcus about his day, she listened to him talk about a property deal that was stalling and a contractor who was difficult and his worry about his mother now that his father was gone. She was present, she was kind, she was not distant or cold, she did not perform anger. She was simply, for the first time in 11 years, fully awake. She watched Marcus with new attention, not suspicious exactly, more like careful, like a scientist observing a known variable with new instruments. She watched how he spoke about his family and how he never quite defended her. She watched how he accepted Diane's behavior as simply how Diane was. She watched how he had, over 11 years, consistently chosen the path of least resistance, which always happened to be the path that asked Sarah to absorb the friction. She was not ready to hate him. She did not think she was capable of hating him. But she was learning something about how a person could be genuinely loving in their private moments and genuinely cowardly in all the moments that mattered to someone else. She thought about whether that was enough, whether love without courage was still love or just a feeling that hadn't been tested yet. The answer arrived in the form of a phone call she was not supposed to hear. Marcus was in his home office on a Saturday afternoon, the door half open. She was in the hallway carrying a basket of laundry to the bedroom. She heard his voice, low and urgent in the way it got when he was managing something he didn't want to manage. She slowed. She's not proud of this. She was not raised to eavesdrop. But the basket was heavy and she was tired and she had been paying very close attention for 2 weeks and something in the pattern of his voice made her stop. She heard Owen's name, she heard the words "the house situation." She heard Marcus say something about needing to sort out what was in both their names before things got complicated. Then she heard him say, very clearly, "I just don't think Sarah needs to be involved in the Mercer Street stuff. She's not family in that sense." She stood in the hallway with the laundry basket for 4 seconds. Then she walked to the bedroom, set the basket down, and sat on the edge of the bed. She is not family in that sense. 11 years, the gravy, the hand, the trays, the casseroles no one ate, the photo caption with 11 names, the seating chart, the chat notification, the private dinner, the practical conversations she was excluded from, the reunion, the Thanksgiving, every small erosion, every quiet moment of being made to feel peripheral in a life she had helped build. Not family in that sense. She picked up her phone and she called Clara. Clara answered on the second ring. Sarah said, "I'd like to move forward with everything we discussed, all of it." Clara said, "I'll have the first documents ready Monday morning." The first thing Clara helped her finalize was a legal separation of certain jointly held assets into accounts and instruments that were structured for Sarah's protection in the event of any change in the marriage's legal status. This was not deceptive. Everything was done in accordance with what was legally hers. The house was jointly owned and that position was already documented. The investment portfolio they had built together had Sarah's contributions carefully recorded going back to year 1. The savings she had accumulated privately, in accounts that had always been hers alone, were simply organized more carefully. The second thing Clara helped her with was a letter, not to Marcus, not yet, to an estate attorney regarding the Mercer Street house and the family trust, asking for a review of whether Marcus's share of the estate and any decisions made in those practical conversations had any interaction with jointly held marital assets. This was a routine inquiry. It was the kind of thing a financially informed person would do. But it meant that the conversation about the Mercer Street house was now documented in a legal context. She did not tell Marcus about either of these things. She did not tell Marcus because Marcus was not family in that sense. The middle weeks of November passed. The house was quiet. Marcus moved through his grief in the way men who don't know how to be vulnerable move through grief, by staying busy, by focusing on Logie. Sticks by not quite sitting with the loss. Sarah gave him space. She cooked. She left meals when she knew he would come home late. She did not crowd him. She was still the person who showed up in the ways that mattered. But she was also, simultaneously, making sure that when the next door closed in her face, she was not standing on someone else's porch. The call came on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the funeral. She was at her desk at work when her cell phone rang with the Mercer Street house number. She did not know when she had last received a call from that number. It had always been Marcus who bridged that connection. She stared at it for a moment, then she answered. It was Diane. She sounded different on the phone than in person. Smaller somehow, tired. She said, "Sarah, I'm glad I caught you. I need to speak with you about something important." There was a pause, then she said, "It's about the house." Sarah waited. Diane explained. Robert's estate, it turned out, was more complicated than the family had realized. There were tax implications they had not anticipated. There was a matter of the mortgage on the Mercer Street house that had not been as fully settled as Robert had implied. There were accounts that needed to be handled in a certain way. And there was, Diane said, a property in Marcus's portion of the estate, a commercial property that Robert had quietly placed in trust years ago, that had certain conditions attached to it that the family's current attorney was having difficulty navigating. Diane needed someone who understood financial structures. Diane needed someone who could translate what the estate attorney was saying into plain language. Diane needed someone who could advise on the best approach without it costing a fortune in additional legal fees. Diane needed Sarah. The silence on the phone was not long, but it was complete. Sarah thought about the dinner she hadn't been invited to. She thought about the 41 pages. She thought about the chat notification. She thought about standing on the porch of the Mercer Street house while her husband walked in without her. She thought about the laundry basket and the hallway and the words "not family" in that sense. She thought about 11 years of made gravy and carried trays and held hands. Then she thought about something else. She thought about what she knew, what she had access to that they did not, what her professional expertise was worth in a room full of people who had been making financial decisions without anyone who actually understood finance. She thought about Clara's fees. She thought about what good advice was worth. She said, "I can take a look at the documents. I'd want to see everything, and I'll need to bring my attorney because some of what you're describing involves instruments that touch our joint assets, which means I have a professional obligation to loop her in." She paused. "Also, Diane, I want to be honest with you. This kind of consultation, when it comes through my firm, carries a professional fee. I would normally waive that for family. I want to think carefully about whether that's appropriate here." There was a very long pause on the other end. Diane said, of course, Sarah, whatever you think is best." She hung up the phone and sat very still at her desk for a moment. Then she opened a new email to Clara and typed, "The Hales called. They need our help. Attach the full records." She hit send. The meeting at the Mercer Street house took place the following Thursday. Sarah arrived with Clara. Marcus was already there along with Owen, Cara, Diane, and the estate attorney, a man named Gerald who looked like he had never had anyone challenge his analysis before and was not looking forward to it. Sarah greeted everyone warmly. She hugged Diane. She shook Owen's hand. She kissed Marcus on the cheek. She was calm and professional and looked entirely like someone who had nowhere else to be and no unresolved feelings in her body. Gerald laid out the situation. It was, as Sarah had suspected from Diane's description, a tangle of poorly structured decisions made over many years by a man who had been intelligent but not financially rigorous. There were overlapping trusts, a commercial property with conditions that restricted how it could be sold or transferred, tax exposure that the estate had not properly accounted for, and a mortgage on the Mercer Street house that was more entangled with Marcus's portion of the estate than anyone had realized. Sarah listened carefully. She asked Gerald 4 questions. Each question was precise. Each one revealed a gap in Gerald's analysis. He did not enjoy this. His face did the thing that happens when a man who expects to be the smartest person in the room realizes he is not. He answered her questions with increasing brevity. She thanked him each time. Then she turned to Diane and said simply, "I can help untangle this. It's going to take about 3 weeks of focused work and a few conversations with a tax specialist I know. Clara will be involved at every step because of the intersection with my own financial position. I want to be very clear about that. I have a personal stake in how some of these instruments resolve, and I think everyone in this room should understand that Sarah the person and Sarah the professional are both sitting at this table today." She looked around the room. Owen was nodding slowly, the way people nod when they are trying to catch up. Kara was watching her with an expression Sarah could not quite read. Marcus was looking at his hands. Diane was looking at Sarah with an expression that contained, for perhaps the first time in 11 years, something that looked like genuine respect. Sarah said, "I also want to say something just once and then I'm done with it. I'm here because Marcus is my husband and because I know how to help and because that matters to me. I want to be clear about something though. Going forward, I would like to be included in family conversations that affect our shared financial situation. Not as a favor, not as an afterthought. As the person whose name is also on the documents, I think that's fair." She looked at Diane. "I think that's more than fair." "What?" Diane said, "Of course, Sarah." She said it quietly. She said it like someone who is measuring the distance between how things were and how they now needed to be. Gerald packed up his documents. Sarah and Clara stayed at the table. The 3 weeks of work she had described turned out to be 4. It always does. The tax specialist she brought in found 2 additional exposure points that Gerald had entirely missed. The commercial properties conditions were navigated through a specific legal structure that saved the estate a significant amount. The mortgage issue was resolved cleanly. When it was done, Diane sent Sarah a card that said "thank you" in Diane's handwriting. Inside was a sentence that read, "I don't think I have ever properly understood what you brought to this family." Sarah read the card 3 times, then she put it in the folder with the other documents, not because she was keeping score, because she had always been someone who kept records. Marcus came to her 2 nights after the estate work was finished. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and he looked at her for a long time and then he said, "I owe you an apology." Sarah waited. He said, "I have let my family treat you badly for a long time. I told myself they just needed to warm up to you. I told myself you were too sensitive sometimes or that the comments were just how mom is. I told myself things that made it easier for me not to say anything. And I know that's not okay. I know that now." She waited to see if there was more. "There was more," he said. "I heard what you said in that meeting, about going forward, about wanting to be included, and I thought about how many times I walked into rooms without you, and I felt ashamed." He put his hands flat on the table. "I'm asking you if we can do this differently, if you're willing to try." Sarah looked at him for a long time. She thought about 11 years. She thought about the 42-page document on her encrypted drive. She thought about the phone call in the hallway and the porch and the photo caption and the gravy. She thought about whether a person could genuinely change, or whether guilt was just the feeling you had right before you slowly returned to who you were. She said, "I'm willing to have an honest conversation, but I want us to see a therapist. A real one, not a couples retreat weekend, a person who will make us say the things we've been not saying. And I want to be very clear, Marcus, I need you to understand that I have been holding this marriage up for a long time with both hands. I'm putting down some of what I've been carrying. If you want to be in this, you have to help hold it." He said, "Okay." She said, "Okay doesn't scare me anymore. I'll believe it when I see it." They started therapy the following month. It was not comfortable. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Reyes who had a calm voice and eyes that noticed everything, did not let anyone coast. In their 3rd session, she asked Marcus to describe in detail the last 3 times Sarah had expressed that she felt excluded from his family. He struggled. He could remember one. He had to be walked through the others with prompts. Dr. Reyes asked him what that told him. He said it told him he had not been paying attention. Dr. Reyes said, "That's a starting point." Sarah, in her own session without Marcus, told Dr. Reyes about the 42-page document. Dr. Reyes asked how it felt to have kept that record for so long. Sarah said it felt like the only way she had been able to stay sane. Dr. Reyes nodded and said, "The record served a purpose. At some point you'll need to decide whether to show it to Marcus or release it." Sarah asked what releasing it meant. Dr. Reyes S. It meant deciding that the record had done its job, that the proof was real, that she no longer needed to carry it. Sarah said she wasn't ready for that yet. Dr. Reyes said, "That's honest, that's where we start." Deanne called Sarah 3 times over the following months, not about estate matters, just to call. The conversations were short and a little awkward, the way conversations are when 2 people are trying to relearn how to be in each other's presence without the old script. Diane once said, I think I made some assumptions about you early on that weren't fair. Sarah said, I think you did. Diane said, I'm sorry for that. Sarah said, thank you for saying that. And they moved on because sometimes that is all there is, and sometimes that is enough. Owen and Kara had them over for dinner in February. It was the first time Sarah had ever been to their home. Kara had cooked something ambitious and slightly chaotic, and they had all laughed about it, and for the first time Sarah sat at a table in the extended Hale family world and felt like a person with a name, not a role. She noticed it. She filed it away, but this time not in the document, just in her chest where good things live. She did not delete the 42-page document. She told Dr. Reyes this months later. Dr. Reyes said, What does keeping it mean to you now? Sarah thought about it for a while. She said, It means I know what happened. It means I don't have to wonder if I was crazy or sensitive or difficult. I know what I lived. And having that written down means I can let go of carrying it in my body. The document holds it so I don't have to. Dr. Reyes said, That's an intelligent relationship to have with the past. She showed Marcus the document 7 months into their therapy. She did not do it as a weapon. She sat with him one Sunday morning and put the laptop on the kitchen table and said, I want you to read this. Take as long as you need. I'm going to be in the garden. He read it for 2 hours. She came in once to refill his coffee and went back outside. When he was done, he came to find her. He was very quiet. He sat down in the garden chair next to her and he said, I didn't know how much of this I had missed. She said, I know. He said, I don't know how you stayed. She said, I was stubborn and I believed people could change if they understood what they were doing. She paused. I still believe that for what it's worth. He said it was worth everything. She looked at the garden. She had planted things there in the spring before any of this, bulbs that had come up by now in colors she had chosen without knowing what was coming. They were bright. They were alive. They had grown in the dark and come up anyway. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who plants things knowing they won't bloom immediately. The kind of person who prepares the ground and does the work and trusts that something will come up eventually if you give it enough time and enough care. She had been that person for 11 years in the wrong direction. She had been planting things in soil that did not want her. Now she was planting things in her own garden, and they came up exactly when she expected them to. The following Thanksgiving was held at Sarah and Marcus's house. Sarah cooked. She made the gravy her way. Nobody said a word about it. Diane ate 2 helpings. Kara asked for the recipe. Owen told a story that accidentally revealed how little he had understood Sarah's professional role all these years and then looked appropriately embarrassed when the story made the full picture clear. Marcus sat at the head of the table and looked at Sarah across it with an expression she had not seen on his face in a long time, maybe ever, something close to full attention, something close to seeing. Sarah served dessert and sat back down and looked at the table. Everyone who mattered was there. Everyone was named. She thought about photo captions and seating charts and group chat notifications and all the small ways a person can be made to feel like a footnote. She thought about how long she had been patient. She thought about what patience is worth when it is finally, genuinely received. She thought about the document. She had not opened it in months. She thought maybe it was getting close to the time to close it for good, not to pretend the past hadn't happened, but to acknowledge that the record was complete, that the story had reached the part where something changed, not perfectly, not without cost, but genuinely. She picked up her fork. She ate dessert at her own table in the home that had always had her name on it, surrounded by people who were, slowly, learning to say it. And she felt something she had not felt at a Hale family dinner in 11 years. She felt like she was home, not because they had given her something, because she had stopped waiting for permission to belong. She had never needed their permission. She had always been the one holding the door. Here is what I want to leave you with. Sarah never screamed. She never issued ultimatums in the heat of the moment. She never threatened anyone or played victim in a room full of people. What she did was simpler and harder than any of that. She paid attention. She kept a record. She protected herself legally and financially before anyone realized she needed to. And when the moment came that they needed her, she showed up as a professional with a lawyer beside her, with 42 pages of documented history in her encrypted cloud, and with absolutely nothing left to prove. If you have ever been the person who keeps showing up for people who don't notice you, who keeps the household running while being treated like a guest in your own life, who gets left out of the rooms where your name should be loudest, leave a comment and tell me. What was the moment you finally stopped waiting for them to recognize what you were worth? And if you're still waiting, I hope this story reminded you that you don't have to. The door was never locked. You were holding the key the whole time.